everyone. All right, give me just a moment. Okay. All right, good evening. It is Thursday, January 26th at 6:33 p.m. and we are convening the Second Avenue Subway Task Force. My name is Xavier Santiago. I'm also the chair of Community Board 11. I'm joined tonight by our district manager, Angel Miskane. Happy New Year to those who haven't been with us at our meetings. A few ground rules to conduct an efficient meeting. 1, no one may speak until granted the floor. 2, CB11 members, if you have questions about board business or wish to make a motion, please raise your hand through Zoom. If you click the participants icon, the participants panel should appear and you should find the raise hand function there. If you still have technical difficulty, you may click the chat icon and relay your difficulty to the staff member. Members should not engage in a back and forth discussion. The chair will recognize the next person to speak. 3, the chat function should not be used for CB11 business or questions about agenda topics. All such remarks should be made on the record by raising your hand through Zoom. Chat should only be used to alert us to any technical difficulties you are having or to state in writing information like an email address that was already stated aloud on the record during the meeting. 4, when a member is given the floor to speak, I will identify you and you can unmute yourself to speak. 5, please keep your questions and comments succinct and germane to the discussion. 6, and that is it for now. Let's call the roll.
Okay, task force members, when I call your name, please answer present. Jose Altamirano. Jessica Elliott.
Present.
David Giordano.
Present.
Marissa Mack. Giselle Malave is excused. Jennifer Meyer.
Present.
Nilsa Orama.
Present.
Beverly Pavone.
Present. Angel, you have feedback. Everything is repeating.
I just want to make sure you hear it.
Yes.
Xavier Santiago
Present.
and Candy Vasquez.
Here.
You have quorum.
Great. Thank you so much, and for everyone being here. Okay. The agenda was circulated in advance and posted on our website. If there is no objection, the agenda will be adopted. In order to object, please raise your hand. Seeing no hands raised, the agenda is officially adopted. Do we have any announcements? Don't see any hands raised. Any informational? Well, Beverly, you have an announcement.
Not an announcement. I was trying to get on before the agenda was adopted. On the agenda that I have, we have also adoptions of committee minutes. And I don't see it listed on
We haven't had a meeting since. And
Okay.
the previous one, those minutes were circulated. So,
all right. Thank you.
thank you. Okay. Any informational updates? Okay. Seeing that there are none, if we can go to the next slide. Okay, so we have an update from the MTA Community Affairs Unit. We have Joe O'Donnell, who is going to be here with us and present on our current status and update. So Joe, should see you there.
Hey, thank you, Xavier. How are you? Thanks
Doing
everybody
all right.
for having us. I'm also joined by Hector Santana from the community outreach team. So thank you all for having us here. Thank you to CB11 as always for accommodating. I'm not sure how frequently you all have been meeting as a task force. I know Xavier and I spoke about it before the holidays, and I know as a course of normal business over the last several years, we've talked about adopting what had been a best practice from Second Avenue Subway Phase 1, especially with regards to the the very active board that you have here at Community Board 11 and the interest that you have all showed in this project. So I'm glad to see that it's up. I'm sorry that we haven't been to a meeting prior. The update on the agenda is a bit of a misnomer. There isn't a ton to update folks on in terms of where we are in the life cycle of the project. For those of you who we have not met with for whatever reason or another over the course of the last year or so, we're relatively in the same place where we continue to wait for our, a fully funded grant agreement from the federal government to give us to indicate that the funds are coming to complete this project. We have, for those of you who don't know, and I don't really have a slide deck, but I mean, I do have some slides that I can share, which may orient folks and may help, at least from a standpoint of speaking the same language for anybody who may not. I see a lot of familiar faces. Hey, Lillian, obviously the community board members. I saw Chris Cirillo on here. So there's a lot of folks who know the vernacular, if you will, already. But if you think it would be helpful, Xavier, I could share a few slides just to sort of
Please.
baseline things to, okay, cool.
You should have permission to share.
All right. So can everybody see that?
Yep.
Great. For those of you who aren't aware, this is we're here to talk about phase 2 of the Second Avenue subway project. Phase 1 in red, almost in the center of your screen, was completed up to 96th Street, with service being operational on December 31st, January 1 of 2017. The next phase will bring service from 96th Street, the current terminus of the queue, up to 125th Street, where it'll connect to the 456 and also be proximate to the Metro North Railroad Station and the M60. All 4 phases of the Second Avenue subway probably will not be completed in my lifetime. So hopefully we get phase 2 underway and going before we contemplate moving on to 3 and 4. Let's see here. This is a project that delivers on promises that were in place since the L was taken out of service, the Second and Third Avenue Ls. This is an area that is in desperate need of mass transit options. Over 70% of the residents use public transportation to get to work, as opposed to 55% citywide. And East Harlem's population growth has grown by 14% since 2010. Sorry. It's a little snapshot of demographics. 12% seniors, 21% foreign-born, 55% Hispanic, 33% Black, all of which are higher than the city overall, and 38% living below the poverty line. We're anticipating that over 8,000 riders will transfer from the 456, eliminating overcrowding on the Lex line, and there will be 2,500 riders transferring from the 125th Street Metro North Station to the new Q service once it's up and operational. There will be new stations at 106th Street, 116th Street, and 125th Street. You can see here there are existing tunnels that were bored, excavated in the 1970s. One of the reasons why we want to wait for the confidence that the FTA is going to be putting forth that fully funded grant agreement for the federal share of this project is because we don't want to find ourselves in a situation like they did in the 1970s. Now, granted, it's a great starter hole for us here in 2023 when we get going on this project, hopefully later this year. But we don't want to find ourselves in a position like they did then, where the money that we have on hand now allows us to get going and start the project, only to have to stop where we are, close up shop and come back another day. The construction approach for this project will be largely 2 different means and methods. One will be cut and cover and the other will be mined tunneling. The end of phase 1, we will be connecting from some of that existing 70s tunnel to the 106th Street station. That'll be a cut and cover construction operation. What that means is we're going to be working from the street level down, excavating as we go in order to meet up with the existing terminus or the end of the tail tracks for phase one, and then being able to connect it to the existing 1970s era tunnels before moving on to the 116th Street station, where we will turn the northern portion of those existing 70s era tunnels into the station itself. So as I say, it's a great starter hole. It's a benefit for us that that's there already. And it's also going to be an adaptive reuse, so that the money that was spent back in the 70s on those tunnels, we're going to retrofit them and turn them into the 116th Street station. From that point north, and then ultimately west on 125th Street, we will excavate to put in a tunnel boring machine, which will run underground and excavate or mine new tunnels from around approximately 120th Street to 124th Street, where it'll start to turn west, connecting with 125th Street, and then going all the way on to Lenox Avenue with tail tracks and an ancillary. The configuration of our stations, despite the fact that there will be 3 separate and distinct stations, are relatively the same. There will be ancillaries at the northern and southern terminuses on Second Avenue, east and west on the 125th Street station. These ancillary structures not only provide ventilation and air to flow in and out of the station and the tunnels itself, but it also provides power and back of the house services for the operation of the subway. As I mentioned, there will be stations and ancillaries structures at 106 to 116 and 125th Street. These 3 new stations represent a $6.5 billion investment in East Harlem. From a design standpoint, we are 100% designed for contract 1. Contract 1 will be to relocate the utilities on Second Avenue from 106 to 116. That's the first contract that we would look to get going. One of the things that we learned from Second Avenue Subway Phase 1 and other major projects like this is, our information, our intel is largely only as good as the drawings that we have from our sister agencies. And sometimes those drawings don't match up with what we find once we start to excavate. So to avoid problems and to minimize those curveballs that we're going to find as we get below ground, we're going to get in there early. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to go in and move those utilities from Second Avenue proper off to the side, east and west, in order to then eventually build the subway. There will be follow-on contracts 2 and 3, which is the heavy civil element of the project, and then eventually contract 4, which is the mechanical, electrical, and plumbing. These are basically the systems. That is contract 4. 2 and 3 and 4 are design build contracts. As I say, that contract 1 is fully designed already, so that'll be a design bid build contract. Just to give you a sense of some of what we've been doing more recently, we've been out and about. We've met with Community Board 11 several times, most recently about the ancillary and entrance 1 section at 125th and Lex, where the Extel development is right now. We recently came to Community Board 11 to discuss increasing the easement volume on the Extel parcel in an effort to advance their project. Extel had previously come to Community Board 11 and City Planning with a placeholder volume, which was not substantial enough to capture all of what Second Avenue Subway needed, but they needed to have a placeholder for our project in there. So we came back to the community board to present an update on what that new volume will look like. Previous to that, we had met about the entrance and ancillary structure at 125th and Park, proximate to the Metro North Station and the viaduct there, to talk about the disposition of the HPD parcels. I'll show a slide a little bit further on, but that area is on both the east and west side of the viaduct is presently or was presently owned by the Durst organization. We purchased 2 parcels from the Durst organization and then worked out an agreement with New York City to transfer the HPD parcels to the MTA in exchange for land elsewhere for the city. We've also been out and about in the community, conducting our second jobs event. We had a very successful jobs event here in East Harlem in 2019. This jobs event was held in 2022 and combined two projects. We also have the Park Avenue Viaduct project, which is going to be taking place from 115th Street to 123rd Street on Park Avenue. So we joined forces to hold another jobs event at the Tito Puente Educational Complex. Very successful event. Again, it was our second event coming out of the COVID malaise. So we were very pleasantly surprised to see over 200 people come out to get information about direct entry programs into unionized labor, apprenticeship programs, as well as civil service opportunities with the MTA, DOB, New York City Fire Department, and NYPD. We've also been engaged, again, not only with Community Board 11, but with We Act, Uptown Grand Central, and our elected partners. We contracted with WXY, who is a renowned design firm, to engage in a public visioning exercise or conversation with the goal of advancing. This is not a new concept. We've heard from participation in visioning exercises in the past with the community board as well as We Act, that the public is interested in seeing a grander vision, especially around the 125th Street and Park Avenue convergence of all of the transit hub that it is with Metro North buses, as well as the future Second Avenue subway. So this exercise was designed to do two things. It was, to get feedback from various stakeholders, elected officials, community-based organizations, the community board, as I mentioned, to get a sense of what it is their wish list was like, so that we could make sure that as our design advances, we don't preclude that from happening in the future, but also where possible to maybe be able to fold some of those wishes into our future design. So the goals and objective of that visioning exercise was to create a framework. And if you see here, we have the title or the cover page for the draft framework that's still currently going through its editing process internally and with some of our partner agencies like New York City DOT to make sure that everything that we heard lines up with what they heard, and we're not unnecessarily throwing anybody under the bus or the train, as the case may be in this case, to make sure that we're representing the information correctly. And then, as I've spoken to Xavier and Marissa Mack about on several occasions, we're happy to come back and walk through this framework with you all, certainly the task force, but the respective members of Community Board 11's different committees as well, once this visioning framework is finalized. Some of the other ways that we've been out and about in the community is we are meeting with impacted property owners. This is twofold, again, to give them an overview of the project and what's to come, but also to inspect and see what kind of stabilization might be necessary for certain properties. Some of the structures here are very old, and we need to ensure that we can execute this project safely. And when I say safely, not only from the delivery of the project, but to the community around it. So we don't want to jeopardize any of the building structures in proximity to our work. So our engineering team and our community outreach team, Hector and his crew, have been out and about meeting with businesses and residents who we've identified as potentially being impacted, either from a property acquisition standpoint or potentially from a construction standpoint, to give them a heads up as to what's to come and to investigate what may or may not need to be done in order to execute this project safely. I mentioned the HPD conversation that we had with Community Board 11 and the City Planning Department. This is that area just east of the Metro North Viaduct. This is 125th Street, and this is the former, all of this except for the area outlined or in red was Durst property. We acquired the 124th Street parcel and the 125th Street parcel in agreement with the Durst organization, and then it was this parcel in red that we ultimately reached an agreement with the city to transfer to the MTA. Because of its location here and where it was in the center of this U or C shape DERS parcel. These HBD parcels were not suitable for other types of public use before incorporating into the Second Avenue subway. So there was no major impact here to the based on the transfer of this property. One of the things we've heard a lot about in our conversations with folks is some larger presence. This is a schematic or a conceptual drawing. It's not a schematic, it's a rendering. And it is conceptual in nature of what something at 125th and Park could look like. This is similar to what the Day Street head house looks like downtown here. One of the things we've heard is that the folks in this community, Eastern Lamites, would like to see a grander entryway, not obviously your simple entry staircase going in. The entryway at 125th and Park will be primarily an elevator entrance. So there's going to be a large capacity entrance here to accommodate all of those elevators. And then eventually, not eventually, but as we progress in design, the thought is always here that there would be some programmable retail. And again, in our conversation with the community at large, some community space here. We don't know what that would look like yet, but there is obviously ongoing talks with Congressman Espaillat and Community Board 11, Uptown Grand Central, about what something like that could look like. So those conversations are ongoing. And then last but not least, obviously, for those of you who may not know me, you have my contact information, my email here. You also have Hector's information. And then the rest of our community outreach team, Jose Carrero, who's also an East Harlemite and probably well known to a lot of you, and Alex Zamudio, who's a holdover from our Phase 1 team, and just has a wealth of institutional knowledge from the way we did business over the course of Phase 1. So we were fortunate enough to be able to retain him for Phase 2. And all of our folks here are based out of the Community Information Center at 69 East 125th Street. If you all haven't been over there, I urge you to stop by and say hello and see some of the information we have. We did have, unfortunately, incur a couple of incidents over the course of COVID when we're not operational over there. We had a flooding incident due to a burst pipe in an adjacent building and a robbery. So we put all of our pieces back together, and we're about 90% there, but all of the information and our folks are staffed there every day. So on Monday through Friday. So we'd be happy to see you and have you stop by and ask any questions that you might have. And with that, Xavier, I'll toss it back over to you. I'll stop sharing, and I guess I can call up anything in particular as needed.
Great. I'm going to go to our board members first. And I think it'd be good before you jump into that, just to give, we had passed around internally the kind of lessons learned doc and presentation from 2017, right after the launch of when Phase 1 went live, and when Cuomo took his inaugural, like right at the end of December 2016. So I think it'd be good if you just refresh everyone the history of how far back the Second Avenue subway project goes.
Well, so the Second Avenue subway project itself goes back to 1929 when it was sort of first conceptualized, but then if not for a couple of wars and the first financial collapse, there were several reasons, fits and starts, but it finally got going in earnest in 2002. When it really came back alive as far as a viable project to move forward. 2008, we put our first shovel in the ground for Second Avenue Subway Phase 1. That was ultimately completed in 2016 with the first inaugural ride on January 1 of 2017. Immediately thereafter, middle of 2017, we established our Community Information Center up at 125th Street. Again, taking lessons learned from Phase 1, we knew we wanted to have a presence in the community early. One of the things we heard from folks in Phase 1 about our Community Outreach Center was that it was great, but why didn't we have it sooner? So even before we had our first shovel in the ground for Phase 2, we've established our presence there, and Hector and his team have been out and about, not only manning the community information center there, but bringing the information to the community. Obviously not during COVID, but pre-COVID and post-COVID now, we've done our pop-up events where we go out and we set up a tent and we bring information to the folks where they are commuting, living and working, and pretty much meeting with anybody who would be willing to meet with us. So we'll continue to do that as this progresses.
Okay, thank you very much. Board members, do you have any questions? Please raise your hands. Not seeing any. We have two members of our public, Louis Bailey. And just quicker, hold on. Beverly Pavone just raised her hand. So Beverly.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mr. O'Donnell, for the presentation. Just yesterday, I went to the community center on 125th Street and met with Hector and he's been, and I believe Alex. And they were very helpful with explaining a lot of stuff, questions that I had. One of my questions was, regarding the possession of the lot on Park Avenue, 125th and 124th Street. And now that you've told us that you have already purchased it from the properties from Dirt and the HPD property. So my question is, the type of rendition that you just showed is really great, because I like the fact that on the avenue you have lighting because it's windows, so it's not so dark when you're going around those corners, and you can see on Park Avenue as well on 125th Street. My concern is that we still need housing in this area, and would you be open to a developer, if we can find one or if one is available, to use the space above the ancillary building, something like you did at, I think, 55 Hudson Yards, where you'll incorporate the ancillary building along with a commercial building. I thought it was a residential, but it's actually a commercial building with businesses and stuff like that. Would you be interested in, or is that still an option to have something like that to even vitalize that area even more so?
Yeah, no, very, very astute observation relative to the ground level lighting and the glass that you mentioned, Beverly. That is definitely a design consideration.
I'm sorry, you're going in and
Sorry?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear what you said. I was
Oh,
having
yeah.
difficulty hearing you.
No, no worries. I was saying, no, it was an astute observation with regard to the design considerations at the street level. We are looking to incorporate, glass and try to bring in as much natural light. And 125th Street is a vibrant commercial corridor. One of the things, again, that we've learned from other projects around the city is we don't want to create dead space. So between the open space and lighting and possible retail opportunities at the ground level, we want to have as much activated space as possible and not create dead space. And then as far as the question or the comment about possible housing, we are open, and our TOD group, Transit Oriented Development Group, which is led by Bob Paley and his team, are actively engaged with our design team, and if some agreement or a developer should materialize over the course of this project, we are open to joint development on these sites. So that is definitely a possibility.
Thank you, Beverly. Yeah, we had passed a resolution last year, which you're in possession of, and we discussed during executive. So yeah, we did raise that, Beverly. Another board member, Jessica Morris. Jessica.
Thank you, Xavier. You can hear me?
Yep.
Thanks. Thank you, Joe. And it's good to see the task force meeting again. I know regularly is the relative term when you have a project the scale of the one we're talking about today, but I think it goes without saying the amount of impact that this project will bring to the community. I am seeking both as a board member, but also as a Second Avenue resident. I live between 101, 102, and I'm grateful every time I hop on the queue and get to places like jury duty at Canal Street effectively and quickly. A couple of things I just want to bring up, and it sounds like you're considering them. The second and third contract being design build, I know that that moves a lot more quickly, especially if you have full financial commitment at that point. There's a meaty component there with regard to our, the impacts on our streetscapes, particularly concern around the ancillary impacts of 106th and 116th. And I say that seeing the impacts of the ancillary building at 96th Street between 96th and 97th, and the scale of that street wall relative to neighboring small businesses and the culture that exists on the street there. I think what you learned about how delicate commercial corridors can be, and Second Avenue in a community like ours is not fortified in a way that will undoubtedly not be changed, be incredibly affected and changed by the decade of work up ahead. So, with regard to the potential for those ancillary footprints and its effect on the streetscape, I think the report forthcoming with the work done at 125th Street is really critical and excellent to see. But I think the scale of our neighborhoods at 106th and 116th and in the wings there at each station, there's so much at risk in these, really large points of infrastructure surfacing that are essentially dead on the street, unless they're not. And so, and like I said, this ties into the frame of the question, which is the second and third contract being design build, and that really, containing some of that meaty work. So that's an unclear, messy question. But my question is about the streetscape impacts around the ancillary footprints at both 106th and 116th Street, and what the plan is to, you're not at 100% design. And I think there's a lot that can change, though, we live with the 6 train, the 456 line that goes through our community, and the scale of impact with regard to ancillary footprint needs is so much different. It's exponentially different than what is required now for safety reasons. So, I just want to encourage, and that coupled with a small business community that is beginning to thrive here in East Harlem, and also kind of connects to the station planning engagement with the speed of contracting for design build and how much you have to do up front. So I want to just, forefront that, even though you don't have financial commitments, we all know the infrastructure bill passed, and that is critical to get started yesterday on all of those things that we think are so far away, but not. The last, I just have 2 other points, and I appreciate this opportunity, is DDC's Town and Gown program is doing a utilidor study. I'm not sure if you're keyed into that. Dr. Radachano, who was instrumental in delivering for January 1, 2017, which I was happy to take a lovely ride on, is, that work is ongoing. And I would hope that the opportunity to cut and cover is going to leave us in leaps and bounds from where our city infrastructure coordination underground is. So if you're not keyed into it, Terry Matthews at DDC could connect your team, and would probably be interested in understanding that from both an environmental justice component, but also just best practices for city procurement. And then rhetorical question: do you have any women on your team? And then did the city disposition of land ULURP process for the parcel that was purchased from HPD, did that happen? Was I asleep? How did that work? Doesn't it have to go through ULURP or no?
No, but go ahead, Joe, and try to, I hope you were able to keep track of those questions.
So yeah, there's a lot to unpack there. But and speaking of packing, I guess let's start with the ancillary discussion questions. So yes, similar consideration for the street level design for the ancillary structures at 106 and 116 are we're also considering activation of those spaces as well. Again, we understand that 125th Street is more of a vibrant retail corridor, commercial corridor than maybe 125th Street. 100. Second Avenue. Second Avenue, you have a lot of businesses, some smaller in scale. You do have a lot of residents, a lot of schools as well too. But that doesn't mean that we want to create dead space in any area of this community. So, the ancillary structures on in those two location station areas are also being contemplated for retail and for activation at the street level. The unpacking and packing analogy, essentially the way it works with these ancillary structures is we know what we need to put in these ancillary structures from a component standpoint. So that either needs to go wide or it needs to go tall or deep into the north and south or east and west in order to accommodate all of the needs we have, the operational needs for the system. We try to not go wide because that means more property takings and more impacts to the residents of the businesses that we need to acquire in order to do that. So depending on whether we can go deep or whether we need to go tall is impacted by the geology. As we get further along in this process, I'd be happy to bring some of our design team and we can talk about what some of these ancillaries look like in terms of what we're considering in terms of the heights and the depths and why we're going tall versus wide or what have you. Happy to have that conversation. But I think in short, yes, all of that is being looked at, contemplated, and considered as this design is being advanced. Secondarily, I guess, was relative to DDC and Terry Matthews. Certainly not on my level, but on the project level. I will confirm who they are or not meeting with on that end. I know certainly from my level, we are. I think we're fortunate. I somewhat unfortunate in the sense that Jano Lieber was a very strong leader of MTA C&D when he was here. I'm fortunate to have him as a chairman now. But I think while that may have been unfortunate loss for C&D, it was a gain for MTA. But also a gain for MTA C&D was bringing Jamie Torres Springer on board from the city, and Jamie brought some folks with him over from DDC, design and construction, cities design and construction. So we have what, in my estimation, from being here 10 years, that much better of a relationship with our city partners based on Jamie being here and having some of his staff. I don't know whether they were literally his staff, but his current staff here, but folks he worked with in the city that he brought over here. So we have a very good relationship and a much better relationship than we did 5 or 10 years ago with New York City. And I think that's a plus in terms of our coordination and effort there. With regard to females on staff, on the community outreach team, at present, we don't. We did have 2 female staffers working out of our community information center prior to COVID. We are only now getting our outreach team back up to full staff as we get closer to actually moving forward with some work here. So we would look to, have no problems bringing female staff on to the outreach team, but certainly as on the project staff, we have female staffers. One of our deputy project executives is in fact a female, and she's also one of those folks that I mentioned who's come over from the city and very knowledgeable about inner workings of the city agencies. So that's been, in my estimation, a huge plus for us, not only as an agency but as a project. Trying to think if I missed anything, Xavier. If there was, I think those were the 3 main.
The HPD lot question.
Oh yeah, so that did move
That's the
forward.
final one.
That went through in, I think it was approximately October, November. It was in the fall of last year. And again, that went through all the proper channels. It was, I think what what might be classified as a mini ULURP. It didn't need to go through the full ULURP process because it was a land swap with the MTA and the city on that. So
Thank you for your answers. I think it really is testament to the amount of knowledge you gained in previous phases and the work that you continue to do to make this the best possible project it can be. I would like to know more about that land swap. I'm not sure, Xavier, that we have the full set of details on where that swap happened and kind of who benefits in the end. But if we can be directed to where we find more information on that, I'd be interested to better understand it. And thank you for considering the ancillary at 106 and 116th as you continue to do your work. Thank you.
Thank you, Jessica. Beverly, is that old hand up from your first question?
Yes, it was, but I just want to also ask, since you brought it up regarding the land swap, I would like to know that information also and where it was at. And in regard to ancillary properties, even on Lexington Avenue that you're proposing to put with or Third Avenue, I think with Excel, would those also be open to have not be dead space? Also, you know, because I mean, the more open space you have or activity you have, you know, you bring a little bit of business or some type of activity to that area. So I would like to see that to be a priority for this community. And at that point, my last question is in regards to the buildings that you had to possess in order to have this project go forward. Do you know how many of those projects, or do we have any information on what did we lose regarding rent stabilized or rent control apartments? And is there a number for that?
yeah, I can certainly report back to you on those numbers. We went through our first eminent domain property law proceeding back in 2021, I believe it was. That first tranche, if you will, of property acquisitions, I believe there was 15 as part of that first effort. Those weren't all full fee acquisitions. When we do those for full fee acquisition as well as temporary and permanent easements. So any parcel that's going to have an impact on it, whether it's permanent or temporary, you know, we bring that forward publicly for a public hearing, comment, review. We are actually moving forward with our second and final EDPL, or eminent domain property law procedure. Where right now we're targeting for March, and that will encapsulate all of the remainder of the properties that we think we need, not only for full fee acquisition, but again for temporary or permanent easements to advance this project. And then again, so off the top of my head, and I can get all these numbers and provide them to the task force, but I believe it's 19 properties that are contemplated as full fee acquisitions as part of this second tranche. So I think overall we went from when we originally put forth the environmental assessment for this project, we went from 34, 35 total property takings to now we you know, over the course of the last several years and refining our design, we've gotten that down to 24 total, I believe, full fee acquisitions. But again, I will confirm those numbers and get them to Xavier and the task force.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, going to move things along a little bit quicker because it's about 7:15. Nilsa.
Hello, Joe. It's a pleasure to see
Hey,
you.
Nisa.
Hi.
Been seeing a lot of you lately.
I know. I have a quick question, Joe. In terms of the acquisitions of the properties for the Second Avenue subway, has there been a thought of partnering with HPD through their New York City Housing Connect program? So any families that are displaced from the properties that are absorbed can get a benefit through the New York City Housing Connect by applying and being selected, right, because of this special project, so that they can stay within any affordable housing units or any units that are being developed in East Harlem, so that people who are being, I don't want to use the word displaced, but that are moved because of this project can continue to live in the community. And so it's a government to government partnership.
Yeah, that's a great question. I'll have to consult with our relocation consultant. We hire a relocation consultant to manage all of those moves. There are federal dollars that get applied to that, so they know the ins and outs of all of those federal dollars. The first thing that we do when we are working with somebody who's going to be displaced as a result of this project, or any of our projects for that matter, is we look to relocate them to a like size, like fee or rent. So whether that's stabilized, whether that's, whatever the dollar amount that they were paying, the first course of action is to try to keep them in this community at the rate that they were in the space that they were, to make it a 1-for-1 swap, if you will, so that they're going into an environment and a scenario that is similar to the one that they were leaving. We use this term eminent domain a lot, and I've used it a couple of times tonight too. One of the things that I'd like to hopefully dissuade, a lot of times when folks hear eminent domain, they think that the MTA or whoever is initiating the eminent domain is coming in and forcing people out. Essentially what happens is we wind up purchasing the property from the property owners for an agreed upon fee with those property owners. And if we reach an agreement in terms on a cost for that property, and they feel that they didn't get full value or they could do better, there are a lot of resources available for them to appeal that assessment, if you will, the dollar assessment for the purchase of that property. So even they can accept it in principle and continue to go on and fight that. And while we do that, we become the landlord. So we're not putting anybody out. It's not like a situation where we purchase this property today and then tomorrow everybody's stuff is on a curb somewhere. That's not how it works. We effectively become the landlord and then work with those folks to get them placed hopefully somewhere within the community so that it's not a major inconvenience for them.
Thank you, Joe. I sort of had that idea, but I just wanted it expressed so that everyone can hear it, because sometimes it does sound like, people will be displaced immediately, or will have no place to go. So I'm glad that you explained that and illustrated the fact that you all are trying to think of these families in mind and trying to keeping them within their community. So thank you.
Thank you.
Members of our attendees, just bear with me. One last board member question. I'm going to you, Louis, and then Ann, and then Pilar. So Jennifer.
Yes, I think we all kind of know that East Harlem has very high rates of asthma and a lot of other environmental pollution. So I was wondering if you could speak a bit about what is being done to mitigate some of the negative environmental impacts that might come as we're building this line.
So we're pretty far away from the heavy civil stuff, and these are going to be design build contracts. And one of the things that we're looking for is any sort of innovations that whoever's going to be bidding on these projects as we get further along in the process could bring to the table to assist with that, and how they would mitigate against that. We definitely saw ways to do things as part of phase 1. So we would, at the very bare minimum, be looking to incorporate some of the best practices from phase 1, and that included air scrubbers over any major excavation areas that helped prevent the migration or fugitive dust and particulates out of the excavation areas. There will be obviously around any kind of work zone, even if it's a hand excavation, there will be tarping, water misting for any truck transporting and things of that nature. So we are aware of the the environmental justice and nature of the community within which we're going to be working, the high health effects already, whether it's the asthma rates and the aged population in this community. So all of that's being considered as we advance conversations with how we're going to execute the project. And again, as these things get developed, we are happy to have that conversation with the task force and the community board at large as we go further. We'll certainly explain along the way what is being contemplated and what the plans are as they're developed.
Sorry, thank you very much. Nilsa, is that an old hand? Because I want to,
It's an old hand, sorry.
thank you. All right, Louis, Bailey, your question.
Good evening, Xavier, and good evening, everyone. Good evening, Joe. Just
Thanks,
since Jennifer already talked about the environmental issue, Joe, is there any way that as the Second Avenue subway swings west, that it can connect to the old Metro North station, which is below grade there? Because at 125th Street, you're going to have to go 3 levels below that to connect it across. And there's an old station under Metro North, everybody doesn't know. Could it connect to that, or that station be revived?
So you're 100% right. It's got to go very deep there to go underneath the existing Lex line. So we're going to be going underneath. We don't want to impact the structural integrity of the existing Lexington line there. So we'll be real deep there. And actually, Louis, I've been down at that Metro North, down to that Metro North station because I've heard a lot about it. It really is not conducive. It doesn't present an opportunity there. We've even looked at it as an opportunity, maybe, for retail in the future, but there's not a heck of a lot down there. It's kind of like, somebody's, well, I'll give you an example. Growing up where I did, my grandfather had a really old, musty, dank, water infiltrated basement. And that's sort of what it's like down there. I mean, there's not a lot going down there. It reminded me of my grandfather's basement when I was there, but it is being looked at, or it has been looked at. It's been ruled out for a station connection, but it continues to be in play for some other adaptive reuse in the future. But nothing concrete, to use an unfortunate pun at this time.
And just one other follow-up. Is there a possibility it can connect? Because I've heard talk about it connecting all the way across town. Is that something later on that, they could, because that would be an excellent connection too, if it could connect all the way across town?
Definitely a consideration, and it's one of those things where hindsight is always 20/20, and at some future point someone will say, well, how come you didn't just extend while you had the tunnel boring machine in the ground? Why don't you just extend all the way to the river or whatever? But no, certainly we're going to have to extend the tail tracks and have an ancillary structure at the western extreme of this project, which is approximately around Lenox. So we're going to be going partially the way there, and what they will do is when they take that tunnel boring machine out of the ground, they will cap off the end of the tunnel so that should there be a desire and an aptitude to move forward with extending further west, that a spur, if you will be in place to contemplate that. This project currently does not, in its budget and scope, have the wherewithal or the financial resources to continue and finish that connection. But as I mentioned, it'll be left similar to the way phase 1 was left, with the idea that we were always going to connect to it to extend to phase 2. Phase 2 will be left with the idea that at some future point, it will not preclude the MTA from going further west.
Thanks, Joe. Thanks for working with us on the community visioning project back in 2017. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you for your question. Anne, your question.
Hi, thank you, Xavier. Thank you, Joe. So nice to hear everybody tonight. So I have about 3 questions. First one being, you might have actually covered this and I might have missed it. The public visioning exercise document, what is the ETA of when that will be finalized and released? My next question is regarding the air quality. Is there going to be required monitoring of the air quality throughout the construction? And then lastly, my question is regarding the Durst properties that were purchased. So you purchased two parcels. Can you expand a little bit more about the deal that you made? I know that Durst had, in years prior, had been looking at developing their parcels into housing, and I know that I just want to know if there were concessions perhaps that the MTA may have made. I know that Durst wanted had approached Assemblymember Rodriguez's office at one time stating that they were going to build housing and they wanted to reach out to the MTA regarding having an entrance directly from the subway into their housing project. So if you could just expand a little bit more, perhaps on the details of the deal regarding the parcels that were purchased, and also how many parcels are they still currently own there? Is that just one?
So yeah, so the actual details of the Durst deal, I don't know. I would have to talk to legal and TOD about that. I mean, I do know that we acquired them for a fee. I don't know if there were any other trade-offs. I do know that all of that, you know, despite the fact that the deal being inked between the MTA and Durst still needs to be approved by the FTA, because similar to any acquisition along Second Avenue or 125th Street for the execution of this project, you know, any appraisal of said property, you know, whether it's 100 by 100 or 10 by 10, needs to be vetted through the FTA to make sure that, you know, it is a reasonable and customary, or, you know, a market value appraisal for that property, that there aren't any sort of backroom deals being done on these things. So the FTA needs to weigh in and bless any appraisals and ultimately the deals that go through, because this is a federally funded project, or we certainly hope that it's going to be a federally funded project. So I'm not even sure that the ink is dry on all of those details. I'll have to double check on that and get back to you. With regard to the environmental, yes, there will be air quality monitoring throughout the project. Again, means and methods for capturing that still yet to be determined based on the means and methods that the contractor is going to employ to deliver the project, as well as the innovation at that time that will help us, you know, safeguard the community as best as possible. I know for Second Avenue Phase 1, we not only had air monitors that were set up along the alignment of the project that collected real-time data 24/7, which we were able to analyze, but our contractor was required to have handheld monitors in real time to take real-time metering along the project while work was going on as well. So it was twofold. And all that gets compiled, and you know, we would put out a report on that on a regular basis as to what the air quality is like, and how we are complying with those guidelines. I feel like there was a third question there, or comment. I know I touched on two of them.
Right. The public visioning document. when
Oh,
will-
yes, the public visioning document. So ideally, we would have had that wrapped up by now. You know, it was my hope to have it wrapped up by the middle end of January and be able to start coming out to the community and talking about that. Because again, what this document is intended to do is set the framework for a larger ongoing conversation. You know, what it's going to do is take all of this information that we've gotten from all these disparate sources, albeit all from inside the East Harlem community, and sort of synthesize it so that we can then use it as a conversation starter with the public at large. So I would love to get out there sooner rather than later. You know, I know it's going through its paces from review and editing. So I will certainly get back to you know, the folks on this call with an update as to when we think it's going to be ready for prime time.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for the question, Ann. And last question, Pilar. You're muted, Pilar.
Thank you. Hola. Good evening, everyone. My name is Pilar. Hey, Joe. I don't think I've met you. I've definitely met Hector.
Laura, we met back, I think like in 2018, 2019, certainly pre-COVID, when we were
in the-
communicating with Franklin Plaza, right?
Probably. I've
Yeah.
definitely been on this for a while. I think maybe that's like the meeting that took place in the theater on 125th, if that's what we're referring to. But I just wanted to make some quick points, and then I kind of asked my questions and some of my questions in the chat. I don't really have much outside of that, but I just want to be very clear. I know sometimes it could seem like, you know, it sounds like I'm against community development by, you know, sounding like, you know, bringing up all these issues with the train. But, you know, that is not definitely where I come from. I definitely love my community, being a member for 42 years. And this particular Michulama being in my family for 60. So I definitely like to see my community thrive and people come visit it and explore our culture, the little that we have left of it. But I think for me, and again, this is not technically for your issue, but it's something I think you should hear. And I think the board and community members are here. We definitely have some priorities that we do need to make in this city. And I don't think personally, the subway line is one of those, especially as a housing advocate too. I'm in housing court and we see the numbers, I know, and I know it's a little harder for people who are not in that space and depend on media to give you what's happening, but it's a really serious situation we have going on in with our housing crisis. And so though I love to hear that we could work with developers on affordable housing in this, but that's not honestly the reality. And as much as I appreciate the city, the state, and electeds always thinking that they're doing their best, they are doing their best, but sometimes we may cause more harm. And for me, this is going to be environmentally very bad, especially for our NYCHA residents who are already dealing with hazardous conditions, and then the hospital. But my questions were, so I just wanted to really make those points and point out we got some really priorities we need to work on, and including the MTA with your current subway line, the way it operates. You took away our newer train lines and gave us old train lines. So maybe that's part of the reason why you have issues on that line. So again, I think there's priorities that should happen before things like this, because we're, in my opinion, living here, I don't find it to be a subway desert. But to my questions, one, and I know I've asked this, but I want to make sure I get it on the record again, since the last time I think this was asked was in 2018. When was the last time you did an environmental impact study? And why, if it's been more than 10 years, what will you be, why not be, will you be open to doing another one? I think I know why you wouldn't be open, but why wouldn't you be open to another one? I personally do not think the supplement assessment that was done, years after the EIS, I think 20s and more recent years. Yes, but I think, I've even told this to the mayor's office. We have a serious environmental issues, including the flooding. I'm not even talking about asthma and all the other things, but the flooding on 2nd Avenue. So wouldn't we think, right, especially as a person who lives here, and I just don't want to go through all this drama and then it's like, oh, we're sorry. So like, why, like, let's do this right if we're going to do it, especially like as a person who really values the environment and our soil. I really hate that we're doing eminent domain to good properties and good housing that unfortunately those landlords are, at least in my experience, haven't been always good. But like, we're just, in my opinion, again, not thinking about the environment and what harms already, especially the hazard harms that Wagner, Jefferson, Washington are going through. And even, I know Metropolitan got like an upgrade in their hospital. And yes, they were kind of indirectly affected with the first phase, but this is a little. So my other question is, what other phase affects NYCHA properties in this way? The second phase affects this community with NYCHA. And yeah, so those are like my really, right now, really important questions for you.
Thank you, Pilar. And it's a great question on the EIS. I know the EIS was done. It was finalized in 2018 when we represented to the community and to the FTA, in search of our finding of no significant
EIS
impact.
or was it the supplement?
The supplement,
Yeah.
sorry. So what
When
I would
was
have
the
to do
last
is
time we did an EIS?
20, yeah, that's what I would have to go back and double check with our environmental team to find out two things. What I'd like to know and what I'll report back on is when was the environmental impact study done? When was the last one done? And how long is it good for? Like what's the statute on it in terms of when it needs to sort of be redone or reconsidered? I certainly know from the vantage point of the environmental justice community here is and has always been considered certainly from a flooding standpoint, that is always considered. Not only is the flooding standpoint from a protection of our environment, and when I say our environment, I mean the subway environment. That's considered, not only is it considered from a 500-year floodplain, but plus, there's I think it's +3. So they go above and beyond what the 500-year flood plan is in the protection of our system. Because one of the ironies of this whole thing is, as I worked on phase 1, and I thought, as we, erroneously thought, as we, moved from 63rd Street to 72nd Street, ultimately to 96th Street, that we were going uptown and we were going up in elevation, when in fact 96th Street area is one of the low points in the entirety of the city and prone to flooding. So just because we're going uptown does not mean that we're going up in elevation. So that is certainly considered. But I'll get back to you. I'll get back to Xavier and thereby this committee and you on when the last EIS was finalized and how long that is good for.
Yeah, I think
And also how many NYCHA properties in the other phases are
Well,
affected?
so certainly this area has one of the highest density of NYCHA populations in all of the city. So I don't think that we're going to find another area that would be similarly impactful to NYCHA just based on the density that we have here in this particular area, but I'll confirm that as well.
I think it'd be great when you get all that information. We'll try to align the next meeting of this task force. One last question, Bev, and then I'm going to move on to our next agenda item. Beverly?
Yes, thank you. Good question regarding the ESA, the environmental. My question is actually on that, and just in precaution, or what do you do? You said that you have meetings, monitors of the air quality in phase 1 or in the past of other new train stations that you have made. What type of things happen if you get a bad air quality on a specific day? What do you do on when that happens? Or do you have any data that you had to make some type of changes because the air quality was bad? And would that information be open to the public?
Yeah, so yes, we certainly on 2 of the more high profile projects of recent memory, the Second Avenue Subway Phase 1 and the Canarsie Tunnel project, or the L project, there was considerable air monitoring around both of those projects. And just using the L project as a more recent example, there was the 24-hour monitoring, not only inside the station area because it was an enclosed area and therefore more susceptible to pocketing of particulate, but also outside the station area for any fugitive or migrant dust that got out of the station. And if there is a baseline that is set based on what the existing conditions. I'm sure you probably would, but also wouldn't be surprised to know that New York City and dense urban environments, city environments like this, already have a very high level of background dust going on because of all of the construction and activity going on throughout the city itself. So there's already a high level of stuff floating around. So once we establish the baseline, there is then an acceptable, DEP accepted limit that we can go above that. And then if that is exceeded, it triggers alarms on those monitors and those systems, which then require us to stop working. Not me per se, but the contractor would be required to stop working, reevaluate their mitigation methods. And if those cannot be adjusted to get it within baseline or within the acceptable limits, then they need to consider changing means and methods as to how they're delivering the project. Sometimes there's a trade-off. We need to go to smaller equipment that's, sometimes it's from a noise standpoint. If we're in noise exceedances, we need to go to a smaller piece of equipment because we're going over noise. Sometimes it's, too powerful and generating too much dust. So therefore we have to go to a smaller piece of equipment. The trade-off being that sometimes that will translate to longer work because it's a smaller, less powerful piece of equipment. But those will be evaluated in real time, and the contractor will be required to stop what they're doing until we find a path forward that stays within those acceptable limits.
Thank you, Bev. Good question. I'm gonna give Stephanie one who hasn't spoken, then I'm gonna close this out on this section so we can move along. Thank you, Steph.
Thank you, Xavier. Hi, Joe. I just have a quick question. I know you said the Park Avenue Viaduct from 115th to 103rd was was that already
23rd.
done?
No, it's 115 to 123. Not 103, but just aside from that, no, it's getting ready to get underway now. That one's gonna go. We awarded the contract at the end of last year, so in December of 2022. And then they're gonna start doing the subsurface work in 2023, which is underneath the viaduct in terms of prepping the surface and doing what they need to do under there. And then the sort of, again, real heavy civil work will start in 24 on that project.
So is it possible that this work is going to overlap with the Second Avenue subway?
It could overlap with the early utility work, but that is going to be largely focused on 106 to 116, as I mentioned. So no, I mean, there's direct coordination between the project teams to minimize the impacts of those two projects and the confluence of those two projects. The real work for 125th Street area wouldn't be until contracts 2 or 3, 2 and 3. So that's a good ways down the road yet. The Park Avenue Viaduct project is already awarded and moving forward. And as I said, we're still waiting on some confidence from the FTA that fully funded grant agreement is going to come. So, we're still a little ways off before we get to 125th Street area.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Steph. One last question, because that really kind of dovetails well with mine, is where we are right now is a bit of a holding pattern due to financing. And when we had the presentation at executive asking for the letter of no objection, it was so that way they could get the application into the FTA. So, and if, let's say the pot was full right now, what would you say to get contracts 2 and 3? Let's just say we had full funding today, in your experience with, say, phase 1, to then online and be underground digging.
So, provided we had full.
Big guesstimation, by the way.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and so if we were to have coffers full and ready to go right now, we could get going on that early utility work. And then we would probably advertise while doing that early utility work for phases 2 and 3. And then it takes anywhere from 6 months to a year to, work through the procurement process and get the contractor on board and going. And then with those being design build contracts, they, unlike phase 1 or not phase 1 Second Avenue subway, but phase 1 of this particular project, the early utility work, contract 1, so as to not confuse terminology, which is fully designed, the contractor is going to have to come on board, advance their design. So it's going to be another 3 to 6 months before they actually get going and working once they're brought on board, because they have to advance the design, confirm our presumptions, and lay their path forward. So I would think it would be another 3 to 6 months. So even today, we're everything to move forward. Tomorrow, you're probably talking a year before heavy construction got going for those contracts 2 and 3.
Okay, and that's being financing contingent today.
Yeah.
Not.
Yeah,
Okay.
I'm more likely that we would get that early utility work going this year.
Okay.
And that would be on Second Ave proper.
Okay, great. Thank you, Joe. That's very helpful. Well, I want to tell you thank you to you and everyone at the MTA for coming out. When you get the other items that were requested, we'll let you know when our next meeting is. And if you can just come and give a quick update, that would be great.
Great. Thanks so much. And thanks for having us. And thanks everybody for your diligence and commitment to making sure that this project gets delivered safely and effectively. So thank you all for your efforts here.
Great. Thank you. All right. Have a good evening. Good night. Angel, if you wouldn't mind bringing up the agenda, please. Okay, so the next item is discussion on the format and workflow of the task force in anticipation. So we've all heard our runway, if we had full financing covers full tomorrow. I mean, and where we are looking at is the electrical work, which you talked about, the phase 1. We've got bit of a ways ahead of us before we get into the actual heavy construction components, but in consultation, speaking with both Jessica Ali and a few others and Angel, our general thought is we branch out to include other entities into our task force work. And that would include, and I want to hear your feedback on this. This would include our elected officials. It would include other CBOs as well, and kind of expand the group a little bit more holistically, so we are being as transparent and engaged as possible in the community. For example, say Franklin Plaza, several of our NYCHA developments that are along the Second Avenue run, any of those. We don't have any bids on 116th or 125th, for example, but those businesses that are abutting the development area. So those are a handful of recommendations, and we have on our little internal drive a list of groups we'd like to work with. And I'd like to, before we send out the official letter, and I want to thank those representatives from our elected officials who are here tonight. I do appreciate you being here. Thank you. And we'll be, once I get some feedback, we'll be sending out the official letters to your offices. So I'd like to open it up for discussion, including also to, how often we meet, given what we've heard from Joe O'Donnell. So Beverly, you have your hand raised.
Yes, Xavier, in regards to opening up this task force to businesses and stuff within our community, are we also considering reaching out to the community across Fifth Avenue, since it's going past that, and see how that would, impact, all of us as a group?
So are you referring to Community Board 10?
Yes.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
I have Marquis Sinara, who's the new chair, took over for Cicely because she was term limited. He and I are going to have a coffee, and that's one of the things I want to talk with him about and see if they have interest on that. Elected rep wise, we would have Council District 9 Jordan and or Senator Claire there as well, because that is part of their districts.
Yes.
So Uptown Grand Central is another. That I spoke briefly with Carrie, and she's, as you know, and Diane, everyone on Uptown Grand Central, they're whatever we can do to be of help. So that's that would be an example of the subway station stop working group that would be able to confer and identify issues that are relevant to that area, but that may not necessarily have in common with the 106th Street stop. So
Right.
yeah, so yeah, the answer is yes, and those are a couple of examples.
Thank you.
Thank you. Jessica Morris, you have your hand raised, then Elsa.
I do. Thank you, Xavier. I just want to plant the seed, and I know it's like hurry up and wait.
That's so
right,
true.
but what I really want to say is that the second and third contracts that Joe pointed to as being the heavy civil, and then the fourth one that follows that, which is a lot of the finishes, the sort of pretty stuff that will feel for decades and generations to come. It's design build project delivery, which means that all of the decision making essentially happens before they award the contract and put shovels in the ground. And you write the project before you put out the call, even though it's all kind of left a lot more open than in traditional design bid build. So we're used to reviewing projects through design bid build, and I just even though it seems like hurry up and wait, that project delivery process, the design build project delivery process is different, and it happens much faster, and where you can make impact with your input is a lot earlier. So that's just a heads up, and something to inquire more with MTA about as they're, for public procurement to take on design build projects is new. and they're still figuring out how to engage communities meaningfully early enough in the process with that too. So I would say, we're guinea pigs, but there's a good relationship thus far from what I can tell, and a real interest in working together. So just to plant that seed that the project delivery process is different, which will accelerate the timeline for meaningful input exponentially. And then I just want to say, as far as inviting folks to the table, I want to point to the Elevate Transit citywide zoning text change that was passed recently, and suggest that we extend invitation to critical landowners that will now have the opportunity to have a larger stake in developing parcels within the catchment. So that would take some legwork, I think, to figure out who those people are when they're not always, present, and maybe they're not going to be, the people at the table down the road. But I think Elevate Transit changed the game. And that being said, I think there's value in recognizing the future of the Second Avenue corridor, even now, as far as a potential for bid formation or expansion of, nascent bids. And you think of Uptown Grand Central and how that reflects the incredible investment in transit-oriented development. So, I think just because it doesn't exist now doesn't mean it isn't a stakeholder that also needs, which is hard. I understand. The last just two observations. One, I think the Harlem African Burial Ground seems like it's out in left field, but we need our left fielder. Though where the infrastructure turns the corner at that point, that's going to become a place that gets access through this critical transit connection. So I would encourage, whether it's someone from EDC or the future cultural partner that will be involved there, to engage in these discussions and be plugged into the task force, even if they don't have much to contribute at this early stage. And then the last thing with regard to stage that I didn't get to mention when Joe was here, I think understanding what the staging of the construction work will be before they think they need to tell us, even if it changes, is something that many community stakeholders and normal people will want to know about, and kind of will want to hear about as it changes, as it evolves, because that staging is going to be the biggest presence for the longest period of time until we're able to get places more efficiently and effectively through the use of the subway. So it's not pretty. It's about as interesting as utilities, but it's going to be the critical presence. And I think there are ways besides green hoarding and activating those streetscapes that we want to talk about with community partners, because that face should be the face of our community, not the face of a big blank green screen that that says nothing. So
thank you. One of the things, just for everyone in attendance, is that phase one, the community board they didn't engage a lot of outside CBOs and invite them to be involved. It was very much an internalized process, and they kind of learned as they went. So I think we're doing a few things in the right direction, but I like your recommendations. And I think that planting those seeds early, and as you can see, as Joe's expressed, they've had a lot of lessons learned. So thank you. We'll carry that message forward. Nilsa.
Just an observation with my conversations with CB8 when I was chair and the original concept for the task force. Thank you, Chair. It is always when we try to do a task force, it's always the initial first step is always to try to identify as many partners as possible that can join the task force. But however, in reality, I want to ask you, Chair, in terms of this task force, is there a certain number of stakeholders you want to bring to the table? Are we going to look at different phases of the project, which would then dictate potential new stakeholders to come? Is this task force going to consider obviously putting out minutes based on what's discussed, but keeping informed potential future stakeholders by getting let's say their emails and telling them that, like in the future, we would like them to be part of this, because the danger is, and I've known that from being on many, many committees and task force myself, is that a task force can become too large. And while we try to be inclusive of everyone, the danger is that it could become very muddled and get very little done because there's so many different voices at the table. So I would suggest that in this discussion, whether it's today or whenever, that we think about the different phases and who needs to be involved at that phase. And of course, find a mechanism for people to give their comments for discussion. But I think that we really need to establish a number for the task force. And I echo Beverly's comment in terms of, whether we were going to engage, Marquise Harrison. I'm glad that I find that you guys are going to have coffee because, bid 125th, although it might be farther up, they are excellent in organization. So depending on where we are in the task force and your conversations with him, that may be a consideration as well. So I just wanted to bring out those comments because the danger is that in our zeal to make sure all voices are heard, that we become ineffective because of being too large at the onset. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Nelsa. And part of the discussion is going back and forth, and this is part of that conversation now. So as this is a Community Board 11 led effort, we are focusing on both being inclusive, but also leading the charge and being the institution holding the kind of history and working together to create a collaborative effort and guiding the MTA and what will be best for the community. To that end, and to your recommendation, I mean, we have our standing task force members of the community board. We had initially discussed very early on during our very first meeting about having subway station stops. And those are the working groups, because again, with our task force, if it's something that is completely led by the community board, and for all intents and purposes, and I'd have to double check with Angel, and Angel, please correct me if I'm wrong, if these groups got appointed to our task force, there would be potentially an issue of quorum as well, and it would become somewhat unwieldy. But however, taking the station stop approach, you'd be able to get the input at a more granular level, as it would influence that particular station stop, and then we can bring that back to the larger group. And of course, everyone from each of those working groups would be invited to the meeting, but the standing task force would then be charged of those community board members would be charged with the whatever positions in voting. But obviously those positions would be informed from the working groups. And so take, for example, if we were 106th Street, which we initially discussed, the people on our board who live close to that stop would be myself, Jessica Elliott, and you, Nelsa. The representatives who, for example, from the elected side, who would be in that area would be Espiat, Serrano, Gibbs, and Ayala. And then you would have, of course, naturally, the BP's office would be a standing on all of them. But the CBOs that came to mind would be, for example, Franklin Plaza, Union Settlement, and Civitas as three that would pop into my head right now. But again, if there are other recommendations, I'm pleased to hear it now, and we can add them in. If you want to think on it, and then in the next meeting we flesh that out, that is also acceptable. So that's I kind of appreciate your comment. Again, I want to. At the working group, we should get more into the details of what those needs are of each station and then bring that back to the larger group. And I think that's where our that would be the better path to go, so that way it doesn't become unwieldy. But again, open to your thoughts. That's part of the point. That is part of why we're having this discussion now. The other thing is when we would have our next meeting too. So, but does anyone else want to comment on the format before we get into like the workflow, which would be when our next meeting would be? Beverly.
Yeah, so I guess my question is, in regards to the station groups, are we thinking to have station captains and then or something like that, where people from that area will work together? And if that what you're thinking of doing? Because I know I wanted to, since I'm close to 125th Street, be a part of that group for that station. So is that how that would work?
Yeah, so I guess station captain, I was just thinking captain of the train, right? So I would say that in the event that you would be up at 125th Street, let me go pull up right here. It would be you and Jen Meyer leading the charge. You would share like co-captain or whatever of that working group, whatever you want to designate. Groups, CBOs that you'd potentially be consulting with would be obviously, I believe Rep. Espaillat, Senator Claire, Assemblymember Gibbs, and then Councilmember Jordan.
Right.
So those would be your electeds, and to the extent that they're able to participate or their staff. You then have CBOs on that area, which I'd initially put down. Again, this is in our Second Avenue Subway Task Force folder for the community board members, our little sandbox digitally.
Right.
Uptown Grand Central, 125th Street bid, 1775 houses. I think
It's all a triangle.
yeah, it could be another one. Again, Harlem Neighborhood Block Association.
Right.
They're very active. So that would be an example that they could speak on some of the issues. So that would be an example of a working group. So I would like for all of our task force members to take a look, put in your suggestions, and I think we can come back and have a further discussion on this. And hopefully by that time we'll have an update from Joe on the other questions. Nelsa, did you have a follow-up?
No, sir. Let me lower my hand. Thank you.
Let's see. Let's see. So we have, okay, so the next meeting, I think we're going to transition because on workflow, I'd like everyone to take, I think what'll be helpful is we'll get more information on a lot of the questions that were asked. Is anyone opposed to including all of our elected officials from our community board members? Because I would like to send out a letter at least to the first phase to our elected officials. We have some of the reps here now, and if there's no one opposed, I'd like to go ahead and get that official invitation out for at least the electeds portion as we determine the CBOs. I don't see any hands raised, so. Okay, so I think we'll definitely include them. And then I mentioned some of the names of CBOs there in our area, such as Franklin Plaza. We talked about some of the NYCHA developments. Please go into the Google sheet that was set up. If you have recommendations, put them on there. I'd like to have a further discussion on those we're going to include. But if there are no objections to the list that are on there, we can add them, but that would be for the working groups. I think, but for the core and for matters of having to vote, it will be the core community board members for now. Our next meeting, the soonest we'd be able to meet with the calendar, give me a moment, because we have to vote on our budget and comments. Our full board is on the 21st. And then we have executive on the 23rd. So the next would be the 22nd, but I forgot that that is Ash Wednesday. Would everyone be able to meet? Angel, would you be available on the 28th?
Yes.
Okay. Board members, would we be fine for meeting on the 28th? And hopefully Joe would be able to give us an update by then. Please
That's
don't.
February 28th?
Yep. Same bat time, same bat channel.
I have no objection. That's fine.
Yeah, okay. Jessica, you have your hand raised?
I, of course, have something for work, so I wouldn't be able to attend potentially, but I can verify that.
Okay, if not, just while I have everyone, what about the Monday, the 27th? Angel, does that work for you?
It's not.
Huh?
It does not.
It does not. Okay, so I think we're on the 28th. Jessica, would you be able to just let us know then?
Sounds good.
Okay. Okay. All right, so we'll plan on the 28th for right now. I have a hand raised from Lewis.
Yeah, just a quick comment. I threw it in the chat. Being that Little Sisters of Assumption is on 1/15th, 1/16th will be a stop. They might be a good partner to reach out to. If it's not on the list. I don't know the list.
Okay, thank you very much. Would you mind just sending me an email with that?
Sure.
I'd appreciate that, and we'll take it under consideration because it would be helpful. So I can discuss
Will
more.
do.
Thank you, great, appreciate it. All right, so we have our next meeting. What I'm going to ask all of our board members, please look at the CBOs that have been populated in that list, because the next one, given the runway we have, and I do appreciate Jessica Morris's remarks on the design build component of the contracts 2 and 3. I think once we have our full core group and our working groups assigned, then we'll be able to set our schedule for when we're meeting on a regular basis. And of course, if anything comes up, we can have an impromptu meeting and just get it thrown on the calendar whenever we have an available date. So if there are no further questions or comments, do appreciate your time, Angel. If you can. Next slide. Okay, we don't have any old business, and there's no new business that so with that, I appreciate everyone's time. It was very informative, a lot of updates, and look forward to the next one. So again, please go log in, go into the sandbox, not just with your Second Avenue Subway Task Force. All of your committees are there, and that's where we can actually collaborate visually. So please take time to familiarize yourself. So with that, please call the roll.
Task Force members, when I call your name, please answer present. Jessica Elliott,
Present.
David Giordano, Marissa Mack, Jennifer Meyer,
Present.
Nelson Arama,
Present.
Beverly Cabone,
Present.
Xavier Santiago,
Present.
Candy Vasquez.
Okay.
You have one.
All right. Thank you very much, everyone. Appreciate your time, and we will see you on the 28th of February.
Good night, everyone.
Shalom, shalom,
Night, everyone.
everyone. Good night, good night.
Good night.